Okay, Lexington, it's time to talk. I'm Stephanie Theakston, Program Coordinator for Lexington's Domestic and Sexual Violence Prevention Coalition.
And I'm Diane Fleet, Assistant Director of Greenhouse 17 and Chair of the Prevention Coalition. Welcome to It's Time to Talk. We'll be talking to many community members to help us gain understanding and model conversations and actions to help us move forward so that you can say, it's time and I am ready to help. Welcome to the It's Time podcast. I'm here with Stephanie Theakston, who is the Executive Director of the Domestic and Sexual Violence Prevention Coalition, and I am Diane Fleet, and I am the Associate Director of Greenhouse 17. We've been having lots of conversations with community partners, but today we really wanted to talk about the impact of intimate partner violence on youth. So we're really excited to have Melissa Wallace here with us today, who is the Outreach Youth Advocate for Greenhouse 17, and Liz Epperson, who I've known for a really long time, who is a community therapist and has been doing work with youth and impact of violence on youth for over 20 years. So thank you both for being here today. We're really happy to have you.
Glad to be here.
So I think the first thing, Stephanie and I were talking about this a little bit, and it's interesting because we both were like, we should talk about this, and we should talk about this, and we should talk about this, and there's so much. And so we are going to do another podcast that I think will delve into this conversation a little bit more. But I think one of the things that we know from working with community partners, working with survivors, as we often do, is how to recognize signs and how to talk to our youth and our children when we want to prepare them and we want to make sure that we're doing all we can to recognize signs or warning signs of intimate partner violence in their lives. So I don't know, Melissa, if you want to kind of kick off with this, but what are some of those things that you would tell adults and parents or school teachers on things to be on the lookout for, or be prepared for, just to do the best we can to be aware?
Well, I think it's tricky because adolescence is a period of massive change. And so a lot of the signs that, I say to keep an eye on are also things that can be actually fairly normal in adolescent development. But when coupled all together, I think that, some of these things can be somewhat problematic. The first is just any kind of major changes, really abrupt changes in anything from the way that they're dressing, their discontinued interests, or not, hanging out with the same social groups, withdrawing from the family, a hyper focus on their technology, especially if it looks like they're checking in on a regular basis, increased anxiety. Obviously, any type of unexplained injuries, I think, are always pretty big indicators. And then also watching the social dynamics of whoever it is that they're dating, because if it looks like their new partner has some possessiveness, or there's a lot of anxiety around the relationship, or a power imbalance in the relationship. So if it's a 15-year-old girl dating a 21-year-old guy, it requires some real questions. I think those are the biggest things.
I think, it's interesting when you said that, because I think when we do kind of intimate partner violence prevention work too, it is difficult to kind of know when that situation no longer is healthy. So right when you first start dating, you're kind of consumed with each other, right? You're spending all your time. You do kind of, drop your friends a little bit. You don't engage. But then at what point do you go, we don't seem to be getting back to normal, right? This seems a little scarier. So I think that's always a complicated piece to know what looks healthy versus this seems to be going a little bit off mark. So I don't know, Liz, if you had other pieces.
Melissa made some amazing points and some things that folks really need to be aware of with their kiddos, especially if they're patterns. I always think about, is it a moment or a trend? Did they have an off day versus is that something that they're seeing over time? And just understanding too that there's a lot of kids that tend to internalize more. So Melissa was saying, withdrawing, isolating, kind of turning inwards into themselves versus kids who tend to externalize their behavior. So the kiddos who are really irritable or really explosive, aggressive, angry, I think remembering that being a survivor doesn't always look the same way to everyone. And I think also being really aware sometimes of how we can tend to judge folks and maybe think that they're not fitting what we think of as somebody who it could be experiencing violence. So just being really open-minded to how that could show up and look different with different people.
So we started out saying that we were talking about young people, right? But that is a pretty wide age range. And as the parent of a young person, I was just shocked at how early this begins. And so can you just talk about, Liz, maybe the range of, in terms of age?
Well, you know, I think I tend to sound like I'm really anti-technology when I talk about these things. I'm absolutely not, but I definitely think technology plays a huge role in the fact that young people have access to each other pretty much 24/7 unless there are certain limits put in place. So I do think there's something that happens around like just an expectation of constant communication, even with friends. So I definitely think that's something that has made a big impact on just folks always checking in and needing to talk to either their friends or their partners. I think that that can definitely be something that has really impacted kiddos, like having that technology. And I think we're seeing it. I mean, I have worked with kids as young as, 9 or 10 that are experiencing harassment online, sexual harassment, bullying, things like that due to folks being able to contact them via Snapchat or Facebook or whatever other social media platforms they use. So I think really young is what we're seeing in terms of
Probably a lot younger than parents even want to think about. Melissa, are you seeing the same thing?
I am. I think that media, all forms of media, have had a huge impact on kids' understanding of relationships, good and for bad. And I think that as a result, it sort of accelerated a certain amount of awareness that supersedes their development sometimes. And so I think that one of the things that I'm seeing is that a lot of kids are encountering a lot of messaging and are taking on a lot of experiences that their development isn't really ready to process. Whether or not they're ready or we're ready, we have to address it though. And so I find that I'm actually taking on a certain amount of healthy relationships programming at earlier ages. We used to wait until, late middle school and high school, and we're finding that by the time we are offering this content, they have already had relationships. And they've certainly already encountered some really problematic experiences, largely through social media. So it sort of behooves us to address some of these ideas a little bit earlier than I think sometimes some parents feel prepared to have those discussions around. But I think that the benefit of opening up communication around healthy relationships as early as possible is that by the time we have to have those difficult conversations, we've already sort of primed our kids and primed ourselves to have an awareness and a preparation for getting into some of the tougher conversations.
I love the focus on healthy relationships, but I think it's difficult for some people to even articulate what those characteristics are. So could you just name some of them? Like what would you talk to an elementary school student about, whether you're the parent or the teacher or someone important in their lives, when you're talking about this is what a healthy relationship looks like?
I think a lot of times you can start those conversations with that age group around talking to them about their friendships, and how their friends make them feel. Is it a friend that includes them? Is it a friend that excludes them? Is it a friend that listens to them and respects their limits that they set? Is it a friend who kind of consistently pushes back against that? Is it a friend who only wants to spend time with them or is cool with them having other friends and spending time with other friends? Do they just display like possessiveness or jealousy? Is it a friend who supports them and encourages them and lifts them up if they maybe had a hard time or had a hard day versus someone who says, unhelpful things or hurtful things to them? I think kids kind of innately know what feels good to them and what relationships feel good to them, and kind of building on that when they're at a young age to then help them translate those concepts to when they get a bit older, I think is a really good place to start.
I love that you said that kids pretty much know, because it is easy to sort of take them out of the conversation and what am I as a parent supposed to do, but really having that conversation.
And I think remember too, it's not just going to be one conversation. We always talk about the talk, birds and the bees or things like that. And it's like, it's really hopefully like Melissa was sharing, like you've built enough trust with them that you're having multiple conversations with them, again, like kind of in accordance with their development and what they're able to process and understand.
I really think that to some degree, you can't start the conversation too early, because at the end of the day, they start having relationships the second they're born. That the parent-child relationship is the first relationship. So there's no more powerful messaging than what you're modeling as the parent. So taking a good look at the dynamics in the household and the respect and the green flags, that exist within a family and within that parent-child relationship, because they are going to carry that information out into their first friendships and develop those pro-social skills and that conflict management or not. And to some degree, it's also an issue of developing, strong critical thinking skills really early, because they are going to get into, troubling relationships no matter how well we prepare them. And do they have the skills to know what to do in that situation? And is the communication within the family strong enough to reach out and seek those supports when that happens? I think that the best prevention, for so many of these kids, and the greatest green flags are great problem solving, great support systems, great communication. And that will always start in the family.
And green flags mean the opposite of red flags,
Right.
the
Yeah.
things that you want to have in the relationship.
I think it's such an important piece that you all are talking about, because I think we have a tendency to think this doesn't happen at this age, right? So I don't even have to have this talk till we're 16 or 17 years old, maybe. And we're often responding at a point where we're worried that something is happening. But if we can begin to have conversations of what it means to be a good friend, what it means to be a good support, what healthy relationships looks like, whether it's just talking about within families, right? Because we used to come from, or maybe I'm aging myself, but I think you would somewhat agree, of always the scary thing, right? There was always the scary person who jumped out of bushes. There's this scary person that did this. And we weren't often looking just at the relationships that we bumped into within our neighborhoods, within our families, within our schools. And so beginning to model that, I think, is critically important to get ahead of it. And then the other thing that I think it also helps with to a degree is, I think probably a lot of parents and teachers often don't feel they have the influence to make these changes, right? Like I might talk to my kids, but I don't know that they're going to really tell me. I don't know that they're going to feel comfortable being honest with me about what I'm going through. And I think the more we have those conversations, the more comfortable it is to go to, a parent to say, I need help with this, or this doesn't feel good. There's already a trust there, and a judgment has been somewhat suspended, that we can have those talks. And then I'll stop talking. But the other thing, I do think when you were talking about social media, which is such a scary thing, I think, for parents, on how much is too much, how much is too little, like how do we kind of make sure our kids stay safe? But I do think there's some protective factors around that too, and protective factors around friends and groups of friends. And so I often will see, kids looking out for each other. So sometimes teaching not just what it means to me as a youth of what I expect in relationships, but I'm going to look out for my folks, right? I'm going to look out for my groups. I don't know if you have any thoughts on how to cultivate that amongst friendships.
Absolutely. I think that's really important because, as we know, absolutely, families can have a huge impact on their children, but really in the developmental stage that they're in, their peers are so important. And I think really thinking about just, I'm thinking back to your point, Diane, about the scary person in the bushes, talking to them about how, again, like how certain things can feel online, how certain friendships can feel online too. It's not necessarily the scary person in the bushes or the scary person online. While those people are absolutely out there, we need to be aware of that. Being aware of friends not respecting boundaries online. Like, I'm going to go to bed I can't text anymore, or, I don't feel comfortable sending you a picture, even if it's just an okay picture. I don't want you posting my stuff online. Like, there's a lot of conversations I think that need to happen around what friendship looks like online. And there's a really interesting initiative. I'm not paid by them or anything, but it's called Wait Until 8th. And they have a pretty big online presence, and it talks a lot. It's a very research-backed organization talking about the impact that social media can have on kiddos, and then also just smartphones can have on kids until before they're developmentally ready. They have a lot of great resources about how to have conversations with your kids, and then also kind of talk to people about the importance of in communities having conversations too about how are we handling this? Like I think personally, and again, my daughter's probably not going to watch this, but I'm probably going to delay her having a smartphone. And I think it's important to have her around other families and kids who are also going to share that so they can connect offline. I think we can't just tell kids don't do that. We also need to provide them with opportunities to connect with other kids in person or doing activities they like. We can't just tell them what not to do.
That's
a
great point. Yeah.
Well, I think, some of the other, things that have sort of popped up for me with regard to what both of you are saying is that it's important to talk about boundaries as a healthy part of relationships and getting in front of it before there's a problem. You know what I mean? Discussing what feels comfortable to one another in any type of relationship, is so primary, to building, a healthy, successful relationship. And so, to some degree, I think that it's worthy of discussing, what we call safety planning, before they're even in a relationship, doing sort of, what is tantamount to sort of dating safety planning before they ever go on a date or before they ever really do anything that involves a certain amount of independence. Parent and child defining what that looks like, what independence looks like, and how to navigate that safely. And to think about sort of autonomy and responsibility to not just one another in the relationship, but also to your family and to your support system. Who are your support systems? Because I do think that one of the things that is really protective for young people with regard to an abusive relationship is a strong support system, a big community, not just of peers, but of people that share their interests so that they can forge an identity that keeps them sort of rooted in themselves and protective of that, but also trusted adults, because there will be times when you are not going to be the person your kid needs. And that has to be sort of acknowledged, as painful as it is for some parents, to recognize their kids are not going to talk to them about every single thing. And do they have those adults identified that will pick you up from that party that you're not supposed to be at, but they're not gonna ask any questions, and you're not gonna get grounded, but you can get out of there safely. Those are things that need to be sort of set up before they, endeavor upon more independent activities. And talking about the safety, around social media and technology. I know that when I was a teenager and had a best friend, I wanted to share every single thing with that friend. It felt like intimacy. And I would have shared my passwords, and I would have told them every single thing. And there have been people in my life, and I know that there are in the teenagers that I work with, that abuse that information. And so talking about how to protect your autonomy and how to secure yourself when using things that have such tremendous responsibility attached, like social media. I think those are all things that have to be brought to the table well before the point when we're entrusting them to go out into the world independently.
I love the idea when you talked about safety plan, and I don't know, like it almost needs like a different language, but it's like as you're working with, young adults or kids, like what is your own personal safety plan? Like, what are your lines? Like, are you comfortable with this? Are you comfortable with a friend calling you at 8 o'clock? Like, how do you set your own autonomy? It would be a great exercise to do with kids, with an adult person sort of sitting in to kind of, critically think and process through it. But again, it's getting at it before things have gone. So they feel that they have boundaries and they have lines and they have the ability, the empowerment to kind of say, no, I don't, this doesn't feel comfortable for me and I got to draw that line.
I think that's great. Like sort of letting kids know it's okay to set that boundary. That doesn't make them weird.
But when in doubt, also knowing that they can blame their parent. I think that's
like, my dad always gave me that out. Yes.
Yes.
So we've been talking about, these protective things that we can do for children to help prevent them from entering into relationships with partners who maybe are not kind to them and don't respect them. But what do you do when you recognize that maybe your child or a student in your classroom or something like that is the person that is not being respectful of their relationship?
I think that the most important thing is to take a beat, because as parents, when somebody is mistreating our child and we've become aware of it, the first thing we want to do is get in there and start fixing the problem and sort of saving our children. You know what I mean? And when our kids get to the point that they're in their own relationships and have a private life that is separate from the identity and the life that they share at home, I think that recognizing that they have a certain amount of agency in the problem solving is really an important part of all of this.
For even children that are causing the harm?
To some degree, yeah. I think that it's really important to sit down with both kids and basically share what you're observing in a non-judgmental way, to say, I have noticed that your grades have dipped lately and you're no longer interested in this activity that you used to love, and you're not hanging out with your friends and you're covering your whole body, and I am concerned, and you don't want to use loaded language like I'm afraid for you, or label the other kid as an abuser, because that's not how they see that person. And that you don't want your kids to root into a defensiveness, because then they shut down. And so it's more about, tell me, what you like about this person. How do they make you feel? Tell me what keeps you in this relationship, because I want you to feel respected and cared for and trusted the way I respect you and care for you and trust you. And I worry that that's not how you're being treated right now.
Liz, what do you do though if that is the person, if your child is the person that is not offering respect or trust or is showing possessiveness towards their partner?
I think it's really hard. It's so hard sometimes to see our own children with clear eyes. I think just trying to put myself in that situation, thinking about this question right now, I think it would be honestly really hard for me to see it. And it would be hard if I heard that from someone else, honestly, to believe it. But again, kind of that moment versus trend thing I spoke to earlier, like if you're hearing from either the person your child's, the partner of the child.
It's a tongue twister.
Whoever your kiddo is dating, if you're hearing things from them that are concerning, if you're observing things, if you're hearing feedback from maybe trusted adults in your life that have contact with your kiddo, I think it's really important to take stock and really consider that it's possible that your kiddo could be behaving in some very unhealthy ways. Melissa and I were talking before the show, and it doesn't mean that defines your child as a bad person. Everybody is, I think, a good mix of good and maybe not so good. And so I think communicating to your child that they are a good child who is doing something that you don't like and something that is harmful to other people, I think is really important, but always hopefully conveying your love and support for them. And also holding them accountable. This is not something that is okay. Like, we do not want to see this. I do not want to see you calling your partner 25 times in a row until they answer you. Like, this is not healthy behavior. And, again, there's certain lines, based on the kid's age and like not wanting to cross privacy lines, but you do as a parent have the ability to hold them accountable by, for example, saying, okay, like, until we can try to work towards you using your phone safely with your partner, like, you're not going to have as much access to it. You know, we're going to have to work together and help you seek out ways to handle stress or handle your own discomfort or whatever's going on inside of you in those moments when you're behaving in an unhealthy way towards someone else. And I think sometimes those are conversations that can start at home, but very often you're probably going to need to bring other people in, whether that be like a support group or a therapist, but helping your child develop coping skills. So if they are feeling, a lot of times, you know, that behavior is rooted in insecurity, you know, or it's rooted in maybe what they've seen, maybe they're trauma survivors. Again, not to justify the behavior in any way, but I think sometimes that background provides a bit of a context for the behavior and helps us know how we can help that kiddo.
Sometimes there's a deeper mental health issue at play too that is contributing to that deserves care as well. I think that the biggest thing for all parties in all of this is to not incorporate blame into it. Mm-hmm. It's not constructive. That accountability is, but blame, you know, blaming yourself as a parent for how did my kid allow themselves to get into such a thing, or am I, you know, a bad mother? Did I model things wrong? Why is my kid an abuser? You know, we are good parents. Removing all of that from the landscape, you know, and focusing on where the needs are here, that you know, there is a kid that has some kind of dysregulated emotion and doesn't have the skills to navigate a relationship, and another child that is suffering a certain amount of abuse and doesn't have the skills to extract themselves from that and cope and move forward outside of that dynamic. That's where the focus has to be. And there might be something bigger, you know, as far as, you know, modeling in the household, as far as power and control dynamics. But all of that is something that will be part of a healing process that typically will be guided by therapists in a larger system. That parents can't really do this on their own very effectively usually.
Mm-hmm. We did a podcast earlier. In fact, I think it was one of our first ones. It was with Latanya Jones and Darlene Thomas, and it was talking a little bit about when there was somebody in our family who was abusive, and both of them mimicked it, but Latanya very much was always kind of leaning into it with love, right? So you do have accountability and you do have expectations of families, what behaviors, you know, expected from a person, but you do it out of care and love. Okay. And so I think when you have children, our immediate response might not be so much to ostracize like we might an adult, you know, go bad person, but we sometimes get protected. We sometimes turn a blind eye. This cannot be my kid. And it would be better, right, if we could lean in with love and kind of see what's going on. And I know one of the topics that I don't think we have time here today, but I know is really dear to Stephanie, is kids who have witnessed abuse or witnessed violence. And so when we know that has happened as a teacher, parent, adult, that we need to be paying attention, that these could be things that they might be, you know, from that experience, they might be acting out some need for control or insecurity or modeling behavior that is not healthy. And we should be aware of that.
Acknowledging just that trauma changes the brain. Yeah, that changes people's ability to self-regulate. And so kids who are exposed to violence in their home or like a traumatic experience like that, they may really struggle with self-regulation. And so it's important, I think, to look at those underlying causes and try to get them the support that they need.
For sure. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, abuse is a learned behavior. And the thing about that is that learning to not abuse is also a learned behavior. And so recognizing that a set of behaviors and habits that don't serve you or the people that you engage with, when you recognize that that's not working or somebody brings it to your attention, you can correct that at this age. It's what makes intervention at this age so important, is that their brains are not fully developed. And so anything that has occurred throughout this arc of childhood, there's a window of time that's narrowing through adolescence that we have a little bit of time to sort of redirect that learning. And these can become people that can healthfully conduct themselves in all of their relationships. But as they get older, especially after sort of the frontal lobe sort of finishes developing, around the early 20s, it starts to become really difficult for folks to relearn these behaviors. So intervention is important.
So I love that, just the message that whoever you are at 15 or whatever age is not who you have to be for the rest of your life. But this is, I think, one of the greatest responsibilities that adults have to our next generation. Whether you're a parent, an aunt or uncle, whether you're a teacher or a coach. So if this is something that you feel passionate about, compelled to have an impact on, where can you go for more resources or more examples of how to have these conversations with children? I know Liz mentioned wait till 8th grade.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, there's a multitude of information online with regard to healthy relationships in teenagers. But there's also organizations like Greenhouse 17 and the Nest that provide certain services. I have a support group, and I also do what is a peer support group in the schools right now that is sort of developing throughout our 17 counties slowly. And I'm always looking to build more of these organizations in the schools so that there are more supports. But when in doubt, always contacting the mental health teams in the schools. I think that they're a great support. And also talking to, all the trusted adults in your kid's life so that you can build sort of, a wraparound of support for always mental health practitioners.
I love that you said talking to the other adults, because you don't have to do this alone. It is going to take a community.
I think it's important that you don't, because everybody needs to be sort of holding space for these kids and observing what's happening and not happening with them, and sharing that information and keeping communication open between these kids so that they have lots of trusted people that are looking out for them, and vice versa.
Isn't that what we all want?
Right. Yeah.
How about you, Liz? Can you think of any other resources? I think there's a lot of wonderful resources on just parenting support, because I think a lot of it starts, again, with parents knowing how to meet their child where they are and really help them learn how to self-regulate when they're experiencing distress or discomfort. I really like a podcast by Dr. Becky Kennedy called Good Inside. She has an accompanying book, and it starts with the assumption that all children are good inside. We just need to help them regulate through their difficult moments. And the best thing we can do as adults is to regulate ourselves. Because again, like that saying, never in the history of calming down has telling someone to calm down worked. But the same way, trying to regulate a dysregulated child when you're dysregulated also is not going to work.
Especially if you're screaming at them, right?
Calm down. So it's I think doing our own work as parents is really important. That can be really hard, and it doesn't have to be expensive. Obviously I would love it if everybody could just go to therapy for free. But there's so many resources now, like podcasts and books, and just having conversations with friends who are genuine and honest, that let you show up as yourself and say I really screwed this up, or my kid did this and I did this, and what can I do? Having that community, again, I think, of people who are committed to you and your children is really, really important. Because it's too hard to do it by yourself. And so trying to figure those resources out, I think, is really important.
I think we've had really good conversation. I know, again, I'm just sort of teasing because I know Stephanie and I've talked to this a long time. And as you all both would kind of say, we came in with, we could talk about this and we could talk about this. But this is really sort of the cornerstone of what It's Time is all about, is getting community, together to say that this is important, whether you have children or not, that this is a community issue, and we need to be building relationships with our parents and our schools, and we all have a purpose and a point to kind of play in this. So we thank you so much for this conversation. Thanks for including us. Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you so much for joining us in the It's Time to Talk podcast. We hope to see you at our next podcast series. My name is Diane. This is Stephanie, and we'll see you next time.